Okay, let's take a look at an AJAX request using the fetch API. Now this is getting pretty JavaScripty, and honestly this is not super beginner friendly, but I'm gonna put this out there anyways because it is actually very important when it comes to making single page applications. For instance, you know when you're on facebook.com and you click a link and the page does not flash, only certain sections actually update? That's using the fetch API. So that's basically creating an AJAX request saying, hey, server, facebook.com or app.facebook.com, whatever it is, I want a bunch of data back. And then I'm going to render whatever that data is using JavaScript. I'm going to write out my own HTML, and then I'm going to update the page just in this particular section. So you don't have to make a full HTTP request and query the database for user information and things like that. It's just going to update a little section of the site. That's basically what fetch does. And so we're going to need an API for this. So let's do the Star Wars API. Swappy, good old Swappy. And let's go ahead and let's get the Swappy API here. In fact, I believe it's down here. Yeah. This is the link that we want. So it's going to tell us in here, it's swappy.co/API/people1 or planets3 or Starship 9. So let's go with people 1. Who is this? Luke Skywalker, of course. Of course it's Luke. What if we want to get this JSON data? How are we going to make this work? Well, what we can do is write a fetch. And so let's go ahead and write some fetch in here. We could simply use the word fetch, give it a URL, which was this URL here. And it sort of looks like it's done, but it's actually not. Then we're going to use the then keyword. So basically this is going to perform the AJAX request. There are other settings in there that you can add if you don't want to do a regular GET request. You can do a POST request, bunch of other things in there as well. We're not going to go over all those settings. So the next step is using .then. All I did here was put it on a new line, so it's the same as this. It just looks a little more readable this way. Function, whatever that response is going to be. And I'm going to return response.json. So I'm just going to make sure that whatever is coming back from this URL in the variable name called response, I'm going to then JSONify it to make sure that it is in JSON format. Now, if you've never looked at JSON before, it looks a lot like a JavaScript object. In fact, it is almost identical to a JavaScript object. You have your opening curly brace, you've got a key value pair, comma, key value pair, comma, key value pair. Granted, these could probably not be strings, these could just be numbers, but we can leave it as a string for now. So what this is doing is saying, hey, wait for this to happen, and then when that's done happening, when we get a response, in this particular function, go ahead and turn that into JSON. Just make sure it is JSON. And we know it's JSON because this is JSON format. Oops, I clicked a link there. We know it's JSON because this is JSON formatting. And then we're going to write one more in here, .then function. And we could do anything we want with this response, really. So we could put res in here for response, and let's just console log res. Let's go back to our page and hit refresh. And you can't see that it did all these different things, but it did create an object for us here. And so we have our birth year. We've got created, edited, the films he's in with the URLs that we could then go and hit. It's a list so that we could go and loop through all of those if we wanted to. Gender, hair color, home world, all this stuff. We can go and get all this information if we wanted to as well. Now this is a very simple way of creating an AJAX request with vanilla JavaScript using the fetch API. Again, just to sort of show you how this works, use the fetch word. It looks like a function, has parentheses. It takes a parameter in here. That's your URL. There are additional settings in there that you can set. I'll leave that up to you if you want to go and explore that right now, or maybe explore that at some later point in your career. Once we're done waiting for this to return, we say, okay, once that's done, then go and do this. And we said, okay, well, whatever that response is, we wanted to make sure it's JSON. It doesn't necessarily have to be JSON. Maybe it's XML. Maybe you have to parse some XML, do something else with an API. And then when that's done, whatever this is returned is going to be this variable here. So I just called it res. It's short for response. You see res quite a bit. Occasionally you'll see some people just say R. That's also short for res, which is short for response. So then we chain these together and say, hey, once this is done, do this one and just console log it. Now we can bundle a lot of other things we've learned such as scoping, and say, hey, let's go ahead and get Luke Skywalker. So const Luke is equal to just an empty object. And then we could say Luke is equal to whatever this response is, console.log Luke. And just like in our set interval lesson, let's go ahead and see what happens here when we do console.log before, console.log after, and where do you think this is going to run? We could even do a console log in here, console.log, then number 1, console log, then number 2. And so as humans, we read this as, well, this is going to be the first one, then 2, and after. But is that how it really works? Let's go ahead and refresh the page. We get before, after, then 1, then 2. And then we get an invalid assignment to const because, look at that. I set a constant to be an empty object. What this should have been was a let. Okay, here we go. This works better. So we've got before, after, then 1, then 2, and then all the Luke Skywalker information. Before, after, this was waiting on a response from another website, so maybe this ends up taking a second, or 5 seconds, or 30 seconds. Then it's going to process it a second time, and then console log Luke. Now, what does all of this mean? This is basically your fetch API using JavaScript promises. And the nice thing about this is you can actually split these out into function 1, and then you can split this out into function 2 if you wanted to, and this just looks a lot cleaner. I'm going to undo that and keep that the way it was, though. Now, the problem with what we wrote here is if you spotted this, we have let Luke is equal to just an empty object, and we're setting Luke is equal to whatever the JSON response was. But because this runs, this has a wait time, so it's asynchronous. So it's doing something in the background, and then this runs immediately after this one, or at least it looks that way. We don't have access to Luke yet. So console.log Luke, and let's go ahead and actually say Luke so we can identify this console log. We get an empty object. That's because that's what we set up here. We set it to be an empty object. And only after a little while did we actually get the response back and say, hey, overwrite it. All right, so I just cleaned that up. I think we should do one more thing here. So let's go back to our object that we get from the swappy.co API, and let's get the films. So this is a list. We can see it's a list because it has the hard brackets here. Luke Skywalker is in 5 films. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can also see that there's a length of 5 there. Let's go ahead and destructure this, and let's just get the first 3 films. So we know this is an array, but it's inside of an object. So how do we get films? Well, films comes from an object called, well, we called it Luke. So we could do Luke.films, and this would be an array. So now we know that that is the array, we can now destructure that data. So we could say const URL1, URL2, and URL3. We don't necessarily know what those are, and we know we're working with an array, so we need to use the array type syntax. Let's also put a rest in here. Other movies. So let's not call it URL 1, 2, and 3. Let's do this. Movie 1, 2, and 3 is equal to Luke.films. Now that's not going to do anything because we aren't using movie 1, 2, 3 or movies. And also, const is block scoped to this, so we can't really use it beyond this particular function. But we could say, what is the second movie? Console log movie 2, whatever that's going to be. And here it is. That's the movie. So let's go ahead and copy link location. This was film number 6, and we are looking at Luke Skywalker here. Films in order 2, 6, 3, 1, 7, 2, 6, 3, 1, and 7. So movie 2 had an ID of 6. We can see that right here. That was movie 2. We did that with array destructuring. And that brought us to this. And then we could perform a fetch request on that if we wanted to as well. Another thing we could do is, let's comment that out because that's kind of neat, but not useful. I'm going to change that as well. We could loop through every film and get each one of those. So we could do Luke.films.forEach, pass in a function, This is going to be the URL and then the index. Console.log, the index, and then the URL. This is not going to be in any particular order. It's going to be whatever order this API returns back. Arrays keep their order, so this is going to say 26317. Let's go ahead, save, refresh. And so now we have 26317 in the same order that swappy.co gave us, but in our loop we have index 0 through 4 in order. Now if you really wanted to get fancy with this, what you could do is you could take this for each, and you could fetch each movie in here and get that data as well, and so on and so on and so on. And as you do this, you are actually building up your own form of a single page application, where basically you're just using an API to grab data. Now this is a fairly complex concept in JavaScript. I don't expect you to know this right away. I don't actually even expect you to know this for quite some time. But it is good to know that this option is out there. You're going to see this quite a bit, especially moving forward in the coming years. Fetch is everywhere. It is a great way to use AJAX requests. And just for posterity, let's make sure that we know what AJAX is. AJAX is a synchronous JavaScript and XML. Or in this case, it's JSON. So AJAX, I guess, AJAJ. Originally, it was designed for XML. So there you go. Quick lesson on AJAX and fetch and promises. We used destructuring. We used a for each loop. We are now getting super JavaScripty with an API. That is super cool. Again, I do not expect you to know all of this, so don't feel like you should be overwhelmed by all of this. Feel free to give this a shot, to tinker around with it. Absolutely. But you know what? If it doesn't click in your brain right away, that's okay. It will eventually. Once you're satisfied with this, let's go ahead and watch that next video.